Alright guys, so I'm going to go real quick here. I'm going to go over, excuse me, a little bit of asthma in the morning. I'm going to go over how to use Mudbox and how to get it to work and understand the navigations of it. I realized I never made videos for YouTube on it. This will be a little bit more of an introduction. And then later on I'll go into some more advanced settings, probably next week. I don't know if I'll get to all the advanced settings this week. So I'll do maybe a couple today. And I may even talk a little bit about the skin shader this morning. We'll have to see. I have to get out of here in about an hour or so. I'm going to make this one a little bit like maybe 10 minutes, and then I'll maybe make another one that's 10 minutes and see how we roll from there. This is my morning voice. If you've never heard it before, you do feel honored, I know. It's amazing. All right, so we're going to go to, we're going to open up Mudbox here in a second. Let me see if I can cough him up real quick. He is a little bit of a beast when it comes to running, so hopefully it doesn't conflict with my Camtasia, because Camtasia is a little bit of a memory hog. We're going to do 2013 right now. Next week I'll do 2014 and go over some of the retopo tools, some of the other stuff. If not next week, it'll be the following week. A little bit buried in work right now with 2 cinematics and bunch of other stuff. So I'm going to go and click on Mudbox 2013. I'm currently downloading the 2014, as you can see. Trying to start my engine. I can't quite get it to go. I don't know. Maybe I put in the wrong fuel. Alright. Dumb joke. I know. So I'm going to try to open up one of my older files that I've been working on off and on here. He's kind of heavy because he's got a 4096 texture palette. So we may have to close him out if we're working on it. We run into problems and we'll just grab something else. This is one of my students' projects they worked on. It's so weird looking. It makes me uncomfortable. Look at the alien. So I'm going to go and click on this guy. Now, the one thing I do want to point out when you do bring in your models, you want to make sure they're at the 0, 0 grid access point on your in your environment. Now, this guy's a little bit off just because I was experimenting this guy and I got a little carried away, started painting. But always remember too that when your model comes in, it comes in 10 times smaller than it normally would. I don't know why. Mudbox does that sometimes. You got to make sure you scale it up, and I mean by that by the default of Maya versus the default of Mudbox. It's going to be quite small. Navigation. Let's talk about that for a second. I hit the Alt key. It's just like Maya. Middle mouse drag moves me around. Alt key left mouse rotates. Alt key right mouse allows me to zoom in and out. Whenever you're far away, or say you've gone too far with the camera, well, which would be far away, you can hit the A key, and it'll actually bring your object into view. You also see that you have camera bookmarks, so you can actually bookmark an area if you want to. So I'll add this to the camera. We'll call this car perspective. And I can add that in there. So if I ever do lose my shot, I can actually bring it back by clicking on this guy, and you'll see a little icon. And as you roll your mouse over, you'll be able to see that. That's pretty consistent with Mudbox 2014, which again we'll go over next week. But the basics here of how to paint and how to work are pretty straightforward. I'm doing a little stylized version, a little combination between realistic and non-realistic with my painting palette. As I click on the object, you'll see that it's now active because I'm in default. What it does, it goes in default sculpting mode. You see that's highlighted. But we really don't want to sculpt on this guy. I just want to mainly just paint on textures. I got the silhouette that I want. If I hit the W key, you can see my wireframe is pretty dense. I'll turn that off for a second. But as I click on the object, it'll allow me to shuffle through my layers. So if I click on this door, you'll see a set of layers for him. He doesn't really have a separate layer in this case, but I have a back end of this guy. So let me right click here. Let me see, show all. Let me see if he's going to show up. Nope. Looks like this is the older file. In the other version of the file, I have the back end of the car that shows up here. But as you create your layers, you just got to be careful with it. Mudbox is very object oriented. And what I mean by that is when you click on the object, it knows what you're working on to sculpt. It knows what you're working on to texture. And a lot of times I'll right click and say isolate that object. I'll tell it to look exactly at that object right there. We're going to keep it open for now so you can actually see kind of the stuff that I've done and how to paint. So I'm looking at this guy here and I just want to add a little bit more personality to this dude. So what I can do is create another layer, and you can do that in your paint tab, and in your paint tab you want to click on your new layer, click on a new one. We will call this strokes. I'll keep it 1024 for now. For demo purposes, keep my memory low. Hit OK. And with strokes, I'm going to go to my dry paintbrush. That's okay. It's trying to find a stamp that I loaded, and it's like, I don't know where it's at, and that's right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our stamps here. We have our dry brush, and at any time you can load a stamp by clicking on this guy and add stamp. You can also load it through your image browser here, and you can actually load a directory. And when you load a directory, you choose whether it's going to be stamp here or stencil. Now the difference between them, and I'll go over this briefly here and I'll go over it more later. I'm trying not to be boring, I really am, please stay with me. Stamp is to affect your brush, and actually the type of brush that you'll get. Stencil is basically you painting the texture directly on the object. You'll actually see the texture transfer. You'll be able to see the image of the texture hit your object. So let's go back in the 3D view here. We're going to stick to stamp for now. So I'm going to change my stroke. I'm going to go to my black and white bristle stroke. But I can change the color here. So what it is going to make it into hard strokes, as in hard contrast, and then ones that are in between my color, like a lighter choice of my color, and again in black. So what we'll do is we'll choose, or darker. What we'll choose here is go to blue. I'll make it a little bit ridiculously blue. What I'm going for my animated piece is very saturated colors. It's very hard. I'm doing in between a realism and stylization, and it's pretty freaking tricky, I'll tell you right now. Alright, so with this layer set in, I'm now going to do some painting, and you'll see my strokes show up, which is kind of nice. Now it's very linear right now, but I want to do it, and that could even be scratches if I wanted them to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a little bit higher. I'm a little bit stronger here, and I'll increase my brush size just a tad, hitting the B key and then left mouse clicking. I'm going to turn on randomize, and I love this because when you use randomize, and I wish Photoshop had this. If it does, please someone leave a message and let me know, because I'm pretty sure it does not. As I stroke, it's going to rotate and scale. Right now it's all kind of on the medium range, and it'll do a scale on the horizontal, on the vertical, and it'll also do like a universal scale here, randomly vary the stamp size, and here you'll see contrast. And Mudbox is nice enough when you put it over there, you'll see it'll tell you what it's doing. It says randomly vary the stamp strength as you stroke, and so that's, I guess you could say literally that's kind of the contrast. Just it'll turn your stamp strength off and on, which is kind of cool. So as I paint, you'll see you get like a random type of paint effect in here, which is great for what I want to do, because if I want to do a little more stylization, I can get a little more stylization going. Sometimes Mudbox has a problem with your UVs. Now my UVs are pretty solid on this guy, but it doesn't want to paint on this dude, and wants to fight me. Maybe Control Z a couple times. Oops, I didn't want to get rid of my layers. We'll just call this demo again. And every once in a while you can remind Mudbox, let's just say isolate, remind Mudbox that you just want to paint on this guy so it doesn't mess up anything and paint anything back here. And it will do that sometimes. It'll overlap the UVs if it thinks both of them are in play. And in this case, we just want to work on this guy. So with my stuff set up, I'm going to increase my brush a little bit more. I can now paint. And you'll notice it's painting a little bit better now in the middle because I did a little more isolation. Fights it a little bit. And all I'm doing is trying to get like that stroke look, and this Mudbox is really beneficial for this. And then now if I want, I can change my opacity for that to get a little bit more of a brush stroke look. Ooh, I kind of like that. I might have to keep that. Just maybe make it a little bit thicker. It'll keep my opacity in mind. Pretty cool. Well, actually, I'm not going to keep it. I have a newer version, so I'll remember this. Remember this, what I've done. It's kind of cool. So that's pretty cool. It shows you how to do that. And you can also change the blending of it if you want to. So I want to do multiply. I can make it darker. If I wanted to dissolve, I could dissolve it a little bit. If I wanted to overlay, I could overlay it a little bit and pull the color more. Or just straight color. Just like Photoshop, I can do straight color in there. In this case, I'll just leave it normal because I think it pops pretty nicely there. Now, whenever Mudbox doesn't want to paint a particular region, it's fighting you, one thing you can do is I can right click on this guy and say, hey man, I want you to export your channel to the PSD network. So I'm going to export that. And what happens, it asks me to save it. We'll call Cinematics Ground 2. We'll call this Cinematics. That's from an earlier file. Cop demo. When you save it, what it does, it opens up Photoshop. Now, this is probably going to make my computer come to a crawl. Hopefully not. So, it should be opening Photoshop. Knock on fake wood. There we go. I've not bothered opening it up. CS. Installing CS6, which I need to, because I don't know if you guys heard, but the new CS coming out is bullcrap. Charge us every month. Nice way to end a company's life. So it'll pull in my UVs, and you'll see a lot of little pieces broken up here. These are areas that the viewer of the animated piece are not going to see, so I don't care about them, like the inside of the door, like right where it connects to the body of the vehicle. Some areas are edges that just little small areas I don't care about. So you'll notice the big areas, which are more important, inside of the door, outside of the door, and the front end here on the side with the numbers. This is all important to me. That I care about. But everything else, all the little pieces, you can always scale them down, move them out of the way. If the player's not going to see it, if the person watching your animated piece is not going to see it, you can move them out of the way. So this is a little bit out of context, so don't let that frighten you. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make them like Sean. Every model's not built the same. So mine's broken up because some of the stuff is the underbelly of the vehicle. All right, so we have this here. As we get closer, we'll be able to see where I've done my painting. You'll see the strokes that I created and so forth. And again, all I did was go to my layer, right click, and I exported to PSD to network. So I'm going to go in here and I can fill wherever is not working. So I can paint on this guy or even make a new layer. We'll call this demo. And I will go in here, change my color a little bit. Grab the appropriate brush. Kind of doing this without my Wacom. It's all packed up right now, but sacrilege! I'll do this for the heck of it so you can actually see some of the stuff I'll do. And you know what? I'll make this, instead of blue, so you guys can see a little bit better in the video, I'll make this a little more orange, like maybe it's possible rust happening eventually. And I'll increase my brush size here. So like, maybe his girlfriend got mad, spilled paint. Now I'm going to do a little bit of eraser. Make my eraser a little bit more fractured, or a little bit more random, I should say. Notice my blinking hand. This, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty much how Photoshop and Camtasia and Mudbox are like, oh my god, what's happening? So we go and erase this a little bit so it isn't too repeating. You can see like somebody spilled their Kool-Aid stain. If I want, I can do a little bit of smearing. Not too much, though. A little bit of smearing there. Doesn't repeat too much. Alright, and then now I can save it. And when you save it, you go back into Mudbox and it tells you to bring it in and you import it. Give it a second. There it goes. Cool. So I brought in my layer and I brought in the texture. And you can do this when you have a brush that you really do like in Mudbox. And I can go in here if I want. I can erase this guy, paint erase tool. Let me lower my brush size a little bit. and I can choose a pattern for painting erase for my stamp, again, which acts like your brush. And as I erase, it's going to randomly move things around. Look at that. So now it looks like a nasty beginning of rust there on my vehicle. Obviously the paint would be peeling a little bit. And whenever you want that little sharper effect, you can go in here and create a layer mask on that layer. I just did there. So with that layer mask, I can go in here and maybe even paint some more. I'll go to regular paintbrush. We'll click on the rust brush. I can now do some painting here if I wanted. And you'll see we're masking a little bit here. It allows you to chip away with that brush. I'm now chipping away, I shouldn't say paint, but kind of masking it out. You'll chip away and you get a harder result, because if you just erase, in general, it has like this anti-aliasing that happens. So it's just like changing your type of reaction to your brush in Photoshop when you do anti-aliasing on, dry brush, and so forth. So the mask actually works pretty nice. And you can delete this guy if you don't want. So I can go in here, delete selected if I want, and it'll bring back my other stuff. So you're really not erasing. That's the nice thing about that. Helps out a little bit. Now I do want to point out though, when you are working from Photoshop back and forth, remember that little dialog box that showed up? If you want them to keep talking to each other, you have to keep it on. You have to keep it open. If you close it, then you have to re-export your channel to PSD network again. Just want to point that out. All right, so that's about it for the rundown for Mudbox here. Some of the cool stuff you could do. You can also flatten these guys, merge them, visible. You can export them out, export selected, and then you'll choose what kind of file type you want it to be. You can also paint specular too, so if you wanted to create a new layer, you can choose whether you want it to be specular, and I can do so here. And we'll get into some of these others later on, probably with 2014, but I want to point out how cool that is to be able to mess with this here. And you can also straighten your edge. I forgot to mention that too. There's a steady stroke. So if I wanted to paint in some more rust, I can go in here and I can paint it along a line or an area if I wanted. It's coming in black, and that's because I think that's the color I have. So we'll change that to rusty color. And with a steady stroke is nice because then you can paint and not lose. I have a big brush, but you can get a little bit closer to the edge that you need. Now, sometimes Mudbox will do the streaking effect. That's because it doesn't quite read your polys very well, or your UVs might seem irregular to it. And again, you can export it out to Photoshop and clean that up real quick and bring it back in. Mudbox isn't perfect, but it does have some cool features and cool stuff that you can do. And you can always check your wireframe to see where it might be having problems. And it really shouldn't be having a problem here, because you'll see I have it pretty relaxed and open. Just a little bit of a pinching based on my camera angle. So sometimes if you change your camera angle, lower my brush size, you'll be able to get into some of these nooks and crannies better. See that right there? So it's fixed itself just because I changed the view of my camera. So keep those things in mind. And again, if you do have a seam that shows up, I already fixed this in my other version. This is because the UVs are hitting right here, and Mudbox doesn't always calculate that really well. And again, toss that out to Photoshop and fix it in there, and you can bring it back in. It's actually pretty cool. All right, so that's about it.